so to speak. Enough enemies to fight besides Hezekiah. Hezekiah is no threat to him. Suddenly he realizes that Hezekiah is gaining power. How many of you know that when you become successful, you'll have false friends and true enemies? Who never cared about you until you became successful. And suddenly that principle begins to work in Hezekiah's life. And the king of Assyria sends a letter to Hezekiah. And first of all, before he does that, he starts to lay siege to a bunch of cities around Judah. And he takes Samaria, he takes several cities captive. And then he says to Hezekiah, listen, buddy, you wise guy, you servant of the Most High God, I'm going to tell you what I'm going to do. You see these cities that I've destroyed, that I've left in ruins? Yours is next. And Hezekiah does what I watch Christians do. I've probably done myself. It's in the next few verses. Verse 16. In fact, verse 15. Hezekiah gave him the silver which was found in the house of the Lord and the treasuries of the king's house. At that time Hezekiah cut off the gold from the doors of the temple of the Lord, cut off the doorpost which Hezekiah the king of Judah had overlaid, and gave it to the king of Assyria. Now, what's happening here? And I think one version says the doorknobs, the gold doorknobs. What happened here? The Assyrian king sends him a letter and says, listen, buddy, you wise guy, you're dead. And Hezekiah begins to try to appease the king of Assyria. He's kind of like, I'm sorry I rebelled. Shouldn't have done that. And he begins to send him stuff from the treasury of the temple. First he sends him the silver, and that doesn't work. And then he begins to send him, and you got to get this part, he sends him the gold overlaid doors and the doorknobs from the door in the temple. What's happening here? He begins to give him access. Out of fear, he begins to give him access into his life. Isaiah 54 says, oppression will be far from you. Get this. Oppression will be far from you, for you will not fear. Okay, let's run the movie backwards. If you fear, oppression will be close to you. Are you with me? So what happens? He gets afraid, and he starts to give him the treasury that's inside the temple. Are you with me? He starts to try to appease him. But I want to give you a little secret that Hezekiah figured out, because in the next few verses, after the king of Assyria gets all the treasury, he says, listen, that's not enough. Now I want you. I want to tell you something. When you give up the treasury, it will never appease the devil. You're starting to have some fear in your life, starting to come into some struggle, some conflict. You're like, make things back off a little bit. Just mellow out a little bit. Just not be as on fire. Before I was on fire, I was peaceful, but now something's wrong in my life. Like, no, something's right in your life. You ticked off the king of Assyria. Good job. See, God says to Hezekiah, we're not going to read the whole thing, but God's perspective is this. He says, I put a hook in the enemy's nose, and I've drug him to you. You were born for war. So you're like, I love peace. God likes, but this is God's idea of peace. The God of peace will crush Satan under your feet. You're like, I'm a peaceful man. God goes, peace is warfare. Are you with me? God looks over and he goes, have you considered my servant Paul? The sheep, poor sheep. Oh, he looks wounded like a sheep before the slaughter. Have you considered my servant Sue? Have you considered my servant Ben? Have you considered my servant Ann? What's God doing? He's painting a target on you. He goes, you should go after the little sheep. Bah, 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 bah. Bah. And of course we all walk with a limp because we've met God. Bah, bah. We've wrestled with the Lord and won. I don't know. Anyway, whatever. Bah, bah. And then when the devil comes after you, suddenly you turn into a war horse. He baits him. I mean, bait and switch. Start it with God. Have you considered my servant? And then when he gets close, God goes, "Whoa!" He transforms from a lamb to a lion. Roar! It's God's idea that he would come after you. He makes you like sheep for the slaughter. When he's there, the Lord goes, "Perfect, tread on." "Lord, the devil's after me." No, God's after him. Okay, on to the story. So Hezekiah tries to make friends with the king of Assyria. He's like, "I'm so sorry. I guess I got a little overzealous. Forgive me. Here's some silver." Well, that didn't work. Well, here's some gold. Here's the doorknobs. Here's access for my whole life. Here's my inner life. Here, you can have access to my inner life. And you know what happens? The king of Assyria says, "No, that isn't even enough. I want you. I'm going to kill you. I'm going to take you out. I'm taking out your country. I'm going to rule this country." And he sends heralds. The king writes, Assyrian king, writes a letter and sends it with heralds all over Israel. How many, doesn't that sound like the media? And so they even had it in those days. And so, and it went like this, "We've destroyed Samaria, we've destroyed this country, we destroyed that country, we destroyed this city, and this city, and this city, and this city, and now we're about to destroy you." And he says, "And can Hezekiah save you? Can the God of Hezekiah save you? I think not." And he reads it all over the land. And Hezekiah tries to get the heralds to stop reading it to the people. Like turn the channel. But no, they have to listen. So the chapter 19, verse 1. "And when King Hezekiah heard it," he's talking about the letter that the king is reading everywhere. "When Hezekiah heard it, he tore his clothes and covered himself in sackcloth, and he entered the house of the Lord. And then he sent Elkam," that's close, "and who was over the household of Shebina, whatever, the scribe, and the elders of the priests, and they covered themselves in sackcloth, and to Isaiah the prophet, and covered them with sackcloth." What did they do? They sent the scribe and the elders to Isaiah the prophet. And verse 3, "And they said to him, 'Thus says Hezekiah, this day is a day of distress and rebuke and rejection, for the children have come to birth, and there is no strength to deliver.'" Okay, so here's what's going on. So Hezekiah gets this letter, and he's so distressed. He totally thinks, "Oh man, bad stuff's going to happen." He tears his clothes. I mean, this guy is, would you say he's having a bad day? I mean, I don't know if you've ever tore your clothes on purpose before, but that is an expression of things aren't going well. I mean, that's 3 levels above a bad hair day, if you know what I'm getting at. And so he tears his clothes, he puts on sackcloth, he gathers his elders around, and he writes a letter to the prophet Isaiah. And he basically says, "Listen, we're dead. There's no one to save us. It's a bummer that if you were born in this place, it's a bummer for you. And just tell Isaiah we're all going to die." So the prophet Isaiah gets the letter. Verse 5. "So the servants of King Isaiah, and Isaiah said to him, 'Thus you shall say to your master, thus says the Lord, do not be afraid because of their words that you have heard, with which the servants of the king of Assyria have blasphemed me. Behold, I'll put a spirit in him, so he will hear a rumor and return to his own land, and I will make him fall by the sword in his own land.'" Now let's turn to we're going to fast forward the movie, verse 35. "Then it happened that night that the angel of the Lord went out and struck 185,000 in the camp of the Syrians. And when the men rose early in the morning," I assume it's the ones who aren't dead, "behold, all of them were dead. So the king of Assyria departed and returned home and lived in Nineveh. And it came about that when he was worshiping in the house of Nesharah, his god, that 2 guys killed him with the sword and escaped in the land of Aram." Now, what's going on here? Hezekiah is here. His zeal has caused him trouble. This making sense to anybody? His zeal for God has got him in big trouble. The king of Assyria sends out heralds into the land. Thoughts, speculations, lofty things. Are you with me? Thoughts. You're going to die. Something terrible is going to happen. Your kids, your children. You're going to go broke. You're going to be homeless. You're going to go crazy. You're going to do something terrible. You're going to be out of control. It just thoughts, speculations, lofty things. You are dead. You see what I did to these other people? I'm going to do it to you too. See these people? Read the newspaper and see all the destructive stuff I've done. And you're next.